I was biking around Boston and I was almost hit. But the good news, it was almost hit by a bike.
Why is that good news?
Because there are so many bikes in Boston now. So many people are biking that you can now get into a bike collision.
Oh, that's a good thing.
That's a good sign.
That's news I've heard all day. I'm so glad you told me this. The world needs a little good news today.
Yeah.
Bicycle collisions.
The
world needs more of that.
That's what I'm here for. We have a guest today. I'm really excited about this guest. This is an old friend of mine. Nick Bruel is the author of the Bad Kitty series. He has written, and this may not be a complete list, he's written 34 books and an additional book that I'm sure only I have a copy of. I don't know if you've read any of the Bad Kitty books, or if you've read Who Is Melvin Bubble, or Boing, his debut. But he is spectacular and world-renowned and award-winning, and it's really nice to have you here.
It's great to be here. And your audience should know that when you say old friends, it doesn't get much older. I was
really
5.
Old.
I was 5 when we first met, so it's been over half a century.
And that was
Jim and I have known each other.
I don't. It must have been an introduction between your mom or your dad and my dad. When we
is this
were
like is this the Cooper Village Mafia?
No. Nick was on the exact opposite side of town. So I was down in the Lower East, and he was in the very Upper West.
No, we met in first grade, so this is sort of the Friends Seminary Quaker Mafia, the underground Quaker Mafia,
the jackbooted Nazis of the Society of Friends.
Yes. They will silence you. Yeah. So we met. That's right, in first grade, and we had a similar hobbies, drawing. But like my brother, you have taken it far further. And I love, there was an interview that you gave about how you had started drawing. You wanted to be a comic strip, a newspaper comic strip creator. And that you had done a strip that I can't remember now. You must have done it at Friends, called The Invisible Family.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, it might have been after Friends. It might have been. I left after 5th grade. I went to a school called Trinity, and on the Upper West Side, and I might have made it there. I do remember it clearly. I don't have any copies of it, but the whole idea was I did these little sequence of stories called The Adventures of the Invisible Family. And the great thing about writing and drawing a series of stories about an invisible family is that, as it turns out, an invisible family is really easy to draw.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
just Bubbles
was just sort of a shirt and pants and shoes, and Mrs. Invisible was just a dress, and the dog was invisible. So all I had to do was draw a dog collar that floated in midair.
Oh, so their clothes were still visible, so they weren't. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Oh, I thought you were going to go full nihilist on us, and there's just going to be speech bubbles and landscape, and that's it.
And I didn't use words to tell the story. I just handed in blank sheets of paper to my teachers, and if they didn't understand it, that was their problem. So, but Jim's witnessed everything really in sort of the sort of evolution of what would become my career, because Jimmy and I. We made comic books together in 3rd grade.
Oh, yeah, I remember well.
With Ms. Pillsbury as our teacher. And kudos to her for setting aside this time for the kids to sit around and make comic books inside this classroom. And in college, where Jimmy and I would eventually reunite, I had a comic strip called Kawala Bob for 2 years in that comic strip. But here's the story, Jim. You may not know this. Our teacher in 1st grade was Ms. Judy Chu.
Yes.
And about 10 years ago, maybe, she was still teaching. I visited her classroom. She was teaching 3rd grade. And I was able to bring in a class picture of us from first grade, where with all of the kids, you, myself, Judy, these like massive 1970 bell bottoms. But the coolest detail about that visit is that inside Judy Chu's third grade classroom was the same turtle that was in our classroom when we were in first grade.
Oh, that's nuts.
And she would retire, like 3 or 4 years later after that visit still. And she was able to bring that turtle home.
Wow. I was at the reunion this past year.
Oh.
It was raining. It was this past spring. And Susan Lowen and Keith Smith and myself were there. That was it from our year. But Judy Chu was there. And
Wow.
I got a picture of myself with her. I took a selfie. She's a rock star, of course. So, it was great. And of course, she remembers everybody. She remembered my brother and, you, of course, and, a bunch of our classmates. But what I remember in Mrs. Pillsbury's class was that there were 3 of us and doing mostly trying to develop superhero characters. And I think mine I kind of made out of triangles, like with some kind of a triangle vest. And then... And I don't remember your superhero back then, but I do remember that we had a kind of rivalry with Paul Tarr because he was able to draw these incredible, like perfect, torsos of these muscular, like superhero looking people. And I was like, how the heck does he do that? And my uncle,
could draw. It was insane
great.
How well this kid could draw for a third grader. We were shocked by it. And I would run into him years later. He recognized me. I was doing an event somewhere. I don't even remember where. And he's on the line. And, I hadn't seen him since third grade. So now he is this man who's 6 feet tall and a beard like mine. And he's got a wife and kids. And he... steps up to me. He's like, "You're not going to remember me, but we knew each other in third grade. And my name's Paul Tarr." And I was like, "Holy crap!" It all came back.
You.
Yeah.
No, I remember. I was like, I tried so hard to draw the kind of anatomically correct bodies, and I was not up to it. And it was like my first realization. I'm like, oh, I'm not as good at this as I really want to be. But no, I remember. Now, Kawala Bob, didn't it appear in one of the zines, like one of the college indie zines, or was it where did that? Because there were a bunch of publications running around at Haverford when we were there.
It was the bi-college newspaper. Haverford Bryn Mawr bi-college weekly newspaper, and creating that comic strip every week was very formative for me for a whole bunch of different reasons, because I was developing characters, and it gave me a weekly deadline. So it didn't matter what else was going on at college, because I had papers and tests and grades and things to study for and stuff to hand in just about every day. I also had to hand in this comic strip every Friday by like 1 o'clock or whatever it was. Otherwise, it wasn't going to get there, and they panicked because they had to try and fill the space in the newspaper. And I never missed a deadline, and it was critical for me to be able to meet that deadline every single week. And the only reason I got that newspaper, that opportunity, which was interesting to think back on, is because they announced just before the summer, before our junior year, that they needed a new comic strip artist and a new comic strip submission. So I spent this part of the summer really thinking about what I would do, and I came up with this sort of koala character. And I thought it's interesting to have like this animal that didn't speak walking around on campus, and sort of exploring how people would accept this character and how this character would accept the campus. And I created 2 or 3 sample strips. I sent them in, and lo and behold, they said, "Great, we prove it. You can have the comic strip space." The guy tells me weeks later, it's like, "I gotta tell you, I really didn't care for the strip, but you were the only one who submitted.
You're the only
You're the only one, no one else.
And we had to fill the space.
We had to fill the space, so we tried.
Thanks.
Yeah, I loved Kawala Bob. I mean, everybody loved Kawala Bob. And now I'm trying to remember who was there with Kawala Bob. There was, what is the New Zealand creature?
I had Kiwi Floyd.
Yes, Kiwi Floyd.
His little buddy that came in after the first semester. and I got into some trouble midway through the first semester because I realized I wanted to create a Bryn Mawr counterpart. I can't remember if this was an idea I had or somebody approached me and said, this is a bi-college newspaper. So I had his sister go to Bryn Mawr, and I created a strip that actually caused some controversy because I had a koala bear
controversy.
Yeah. Koalas all look alike, so I thought, okay, I'll have this koala. His sister comes along. She looks exactly like Kawala Bob.
Right.
But her name is Bernice.
That's right. I remember. Yeah.
During the course of the strip, the final panel is 1 week later, and she's got, Bryn Mawr look. Mm-hmm. The 1980s giant hairs combed over to one side look. She's wearing leggings and weird boots, and I got all these letters saying this is really stereotypically insulting. Equal number of letters says you nailed it absolutely dead on. So,
there was no way to avoid with the bi-college thing. There was no way to avoid putting putting your foot in it. But that was part of it. I think that was actually great, because I think in a lot of other places where it's purely like a male-dominated situation, or historically, that sort of thing really at the time wasn't coming up at all. And because Bryn Mawr was women only, there was a lot of stuff that you would kind of get wrong as a guy, sort of assuming that culture was just male.
Yeah, all what criticism I received back then was pretty minor. That strip being the only slight exception. But I got to say, I think being on that campus, and especially at that time, it caused me to be a little bit more socially conscious and aware than I might have been if I'd created this strip somewhere else. Which kind of had me sort of really think and explore concepts better. In a way that I'd use to this day. I don't know if I would have gotten that on a different campus. I don't have the experience of being on another campus, so I can't say for sure. But certainly Haverford and Bryn Mawr, just being in that environment, allowed for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Kawala Bob did make it to the big time, briefly. As far as I know, only appears in Boing. Your first book. Did Kawala Bob ever come back?
I did Koala that kind of makes a cameo in there. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I always figured that was Bob.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he's not really Bob, that koala. And to y'all listeners, it's my almost wordless story about a kangaroo learning how to go boing, and keeps failing until a koala who's been slowly climbing down the tree during the course of the entire book walks over and says, "What do you have in your pocket?"
That's right.
And she has, because kids do this, have so much stuff in the pocket, gets emptied out, then she could go boing. Yeah, and that's kind of more of a coincidence that I used the koala more than once. I figured if it was going to be kangaroos, I had to have sort of Australian animals present, so the koala fit the bill.
Yeah. No, I love that book. I read it to the kids many times, and we've also read a number of the Bad Kitties. But I was told by my daughters last night, they were like, "We need more Bad Kitties." So we're gonna order a bunch. And there are
slowly.
There's so many. Yeah. There's so many. I had no idea.
Chapter book number 18 right now.
Oh, that's right. So it's split between picture books and chapter books.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain this to me? Because I went into Barnes and Noble to buy some Bad Kitty books to prepare for this show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I've made an investment in your career, and I expect some answers now. No, I'm just joking. I go into Barnes and Nobles, and you go into the kids section, and it's like, okay, there's the young readers section.
Mm-hmm.
There's the toddlers and early learners section. And they had like all these different sections, and I'm looking for Bruel. I'm like, Bruel. It can't be that hard. And I'm going around, and I can't find anything. And it's like, then there's a section called chapter books.
Right.
I'm like, what does that mean? What do they mean by books that have chapters? I doubt if the Bad Kitty books have chapters. I don't know.
Yeah,
they do. They do have chapters. But why does this happen? Why do stores do this? What do they mean by chapter books?
No, it's interesting. You're right, because these are designations that didn't exist at all when we were kids, because there were like kids books. Even the concept of young adult books didn't really exist when we were young.
Yeah,
I encountered that for the first time right after college. I started working in bookstores, and the first bookstore I worked in had a section for young adults. And it's like, whoa, what does that even mean? But that's for the older, late teen readers who don't want to be lumped in with kids' books.
Right.
So they may be going to the bookstore because they want to get, books for their age, like Wrinkle in Time. That's even, middle grade already. The Giver, whatever. And they don't want to have to sort through all these other books that are going to have, Mrs. Pigglewiggle.
Right. Yeah.
So they started separating the age groups out around then, like 30, 40 years ago. And then they started sort of creating newer and newer designations. So middle grade came along, and chapter books are kind of like this amorphous, designation that comes right after picture books. So it's sort of like, in terms of reading level, kids, picture books are books that are essentially read to them.
Okay.
Picture books, in the industry, they call lap reading. Like, is this a good book for lap reading? So the idea, you create picture books because picture books are to be read to a kid or to a group of kids.
Okay.
When they're starting to embark on their own, you have leveled readers, which are like what we saw when we were kids, like Frog and Toad and Dr. Seuss and that sort of thing. And chapter books are like the first time they can take a book and there are chapters in it. And that's for the most part where my books lie. But even now, without trying, my book started falling into a whole other category that didn't really exist when I first turned Bad Kitty into this chapter book series, because they were so heavily illustrated that they didn't quite fit graphic novels yet, and they didn't quite fit normal chapter books. So Kirkus Reviews designated them graphic hybrids, like both chapter books and graphic novels. And fortunately, that label never really stuck. Right. So that section has not been invented inside of a library.
Come here, sweetie. Let's go to the graphic hybrids.
Yeah.
Would you like another categorization? Would you like another graphic hybrid for your birthday?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because one of your newer books, Bad Kitty Super Cat, is a graphic novel. Is literally a graphic novel and full color all the way through, which I was actually just reading, and mind blown, Nick.
Yeah.
I have a big thank you at the front. Holy crap!
Yeah.
Holy crap! That's so cool. No, our listeners can't see it, but it
to Big Jim, Little Jim, Linda, Catherine, John, and all the iconic Infantinos, including, of course, Carmine, for all the comic book inspiration you've given me over the years.
I didn't know. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm sorry you didn't know, because usually I'm really good about like waiting for the book to come out, and then I tell the person or I give it to them in person. And I think it came out when last year was just
we were
a full year of bedlam.
No worries. It's a wonderful surprise. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you
very much. But no, we have thoroughly enjoyed your books, kids.
But yeah, now they're pretty much graphic novels. I'm using panels. Right. I've got word balloons. They sort of fit pretty cleanly inside the graphic novel designation. And it happened organically. It didn't happen because I decided one day I wanted them to be graphic novels. It just sort of happened in the sense that I started creating stories that had more characters and more settings, and once that happened, having multiple panels became a better way for me to tell the stories on the single page. Having multiple word balloons became easier, so there wasn't any confusion as to which character was speaking, and I could create more complex situations. So it just sort of happened on its own.
It's all right. So we can talk about other stuff. This is what you do, right? You talk about your books, and I don't. We can certainly branch off into other topics. Really? Okay.
No, because I visit schools and I'm talking to kids sort of about my books, but I don't go into the details of the industry or necessarily how I got to be where I am. Right?
That would be great, though.
It would be lovely, and the teachers might be enthralled, but I'd have 500 first graders who are just cross-eyed with and bored to pieces. So it's much more. It's a very different environment. I talk to kids. I'm being much more interactive about creating a story and things like that. So being able to talk about like how things come about in with these books is a nice treat.
Well, what's cool is it's come full circle back to not superheroes, but to the graphic novel, to that thing where my uncle was certainly inspiring me, and I wanted to do that. And you were totally into doing that. We were reading The Flash and stuff like that. And obviously, Paul Tarr was doing it much better.
He haunts you to this day. I can tell.
He does. I talked to him on Facebook. He's a very nice guy.
Oh, how neat! Yeah, I should look for him. That's good.
Yeah, idea. He's up there. But yeah, so really exciting to see the panels, because there's an artwork to creating the panels, the number on the page, the shape of the panels, the action that happens within the panels. There's a whole discipline to that. So I'm excited to see kind of what you do with that.
But I got a question. Sorry.
Yes.
Jump in. This may have to be edited out. But like, if I look at this, right?
Yes.
I see panels.
Yes.
And I see speech bubbles.
Yes.
So how is what you're doing now different from this?
Which? That's a giant kerflop in the old Batman style. Goes to the
so it started happening around that book.
Oh.
So that's like the 6th or 7th book in the series.
Oh.
Prior to that, most of the pages were just, each page was a full illustration, and I didn't use panels. I think, in fact, that's the very first book where I used word balloons at all. It was interesting,
right?
And that was around the book, and even there with that particular book, I used panels, but not a whole lot of them. It's still each page is more like a 160-page picture book where each page is a full illustration with some text.
It's about half and half on this one.
Yeah.
Which one came first? So I got two. I got Kitten Trouble,
which is much later. That one's probably like number 12 or 13 or something like that.
Okay, so you got things that definitely look like
that one becomes fully a graphic novel.
So is it.
Okay. But that's a good example because you can see I'm telling a very different type of story. With Kitten Trouble, I have a whole slew of new characters that have to be introduced, and it's a much more complicated story even. So one of the first things I recognize with panels that we don't think about is that panels actually slow down the storytelling, because you're going from panel to panel to panel, and then the next page, so on and so forth. So you can actually slow down the pace of the storytelling. But when you turn the page and you have a 2-page spread, that's you create incredible drama.
Right.
So the panels became sort of a tool for me in how I pace the storytelling.
Yeah, the tempo.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. It really is almost like every panel is like the space between the panels is almost like pressing your foot on the pedal of a piano to hold a note.
Because there's an implication that the reader knows that the game here is you're not going to jump ahead 3 panels. You're going to do this panel first, and you're not going to look at the other panels. You're going to do this one, then you're going to do the next one, then you're going to do the next one. That's sort of like, okay, go ahead. So that's exactly I never thought of it that way. Fascinating.
But I'm also cognizant that the books I'm creating, because they're for young kids. I mean, I get kindergartners, first graders contact me because they're reading my books. I don't go into crazy like huge panels. I try to create like 2-3 panels. I don't have vertical and horizontal.
Right.
The diagonals later in the book. Maybe I'll do that later in the book, but for the most part, it'll just be 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Keep it very simple in terms of the panel creation. So not, your uncle's the one who created wild panels.
Yeah, there's like lightning bolt separators and
Your uncle, sort of like formed that whole sort of language of how panels can be used to tell stories in a way that hadn't really been done before. I can't do that. I don't think in those terms, but I think also for my readers, because they're so young, I have to keep the layout simple.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm seeing in Supercat there is a really cool page where there's a kind of an oval drawing at the top and another oval drawing, and then half the page is lawn and some action, and at the bottom there's a panel embedded in the lawn, which is super cool. And this also has some characters that I really enjoyed in school. It's not called School Days. I'm getting your titles wrong.
No, that's right.
School Days.
School Days. You're talking about Dr. Lagomorph?
Dr. Lagomorph and Captain Fantasticat. Those seem to, those are fantastic. And it's Uncle Murray, I think, is one of the characters I love the most. Yeah. And when Uncle Murray would appear, there would be a kind of a cartoon panel that would show up. It's like, what was it? A Moment of Education with Uncle Murray? Wasn't called that. Yeah.
The Fun Facts. Yeah.
The Fun Facts with Uncle Murray. And then Uncle Murray would actually tell you. So Uncle Murray is this interesting character because he just seems like a doofus, in terms of his appearance. But then he spouts all this useful information that is, to the grown-ups, might be fascinating. Maybe to the kids too. The reason cats hate dogs.
I created Uncle Murray for a bunch of different reasons. Well, first of all, he appears in the very first Bad Kitty picture book. I go through this alphabet of animals and foods a cat wants to eat. When I got to the letter U, I couldn't think of a food or an animal that started with the letter U. and unicorn just didn't seem to fit. So I thought, it wouldn't be funny if I did Uncle somebody. So I did Uncle Murray because I had a real Uncle Murray, and I'll tell you a great story about it in a minute. But when I started doing these chapter books of Bad Kitty, I had a friend whose son revealed to me one day he just didn't care for fiction. He was interesting. He just did not care for fiction, and that was because fiction wasn't useful to him. So he had difficulty getting through like a fictional book, but you give him like the Guinness Book of World Records, he'd open it and memorize everything. He loved that. A nonfiction that was information was useful to him.
Right.
So it occurred to me that I was creating a very early, simple chapter books, and my target audience wasn't going to be an age range like first or third or fourth grade. I wanted to sort of target reluctant readers. And thanks to my friend's son, I recognize that some reluctant readers aren't reluctant readers per se, so much as they're reluctant fiction readers. So I'm going to instill nonfiction inside of these books. They'll fit with the story. They'll come between certain chapters, but there's something a kid could turn to if they wanted to. And Uncle Murray himself would become like a critical character in this sort of world of Bad Kitty. And in many ways, he is the sort of moral center of the Bad Kitty stories because he lives with these insane cats, and these cats do things to him, but he just is so good-hearted.
Right.
He tries to get away from them when he can, but his sort of personal sense of responsibility for their care, is critical to how he operates.
And he's super knowledgeable. That's what I love. I just, I'm like, I actually learned things.
I had a real Uncle Murray.
Yeah. So on your dad's side?
Yeah. My Aunt Jen married 3 times. And her second husband was Murray. And as this is how I like to tell it to kids when I visit schools, because they'll ask me, where did Uncle Murray come from? Who's the Uncle Murray? And I go, well, Uncle Murray, when he was good friends with a famous comedy team called Abbott and Costello.
Yeah.
So this is
who's on first. Yes.
Yep. So what I tell these kids to do is go home, find a way to download, stream, rent a movie called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Because if you like scary movies, you'll love this movie. If you like funny movies, you'll love this movie. And while you're watching Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, you can point to the screen and you can say out loud, hey, those 2 guys used to play poker every Thursday night with a real life Uncle Murray.
Uncle Murray. Yeah.
The truth. Absolute truth. What my Uncle Murray would say to me, because I was a gigantic Abbott and Costello fan, right? Every Sunday at 11 o'clock, they showed 2 Abbott and Costello movies back to back.
Yeah, on WPIX, I think.
On WPIX. And he said, Bud Abbott was like the nicest guy ever. He loved Bud. He could say, it's like, and the example is like, you could borrow $20 from Bud. He would never remind you to pay you back. He just didn't remind. He didn't get you out. He didn't get on any case about it. Lou could be dark. If Lou was losing at cards, he got really dark, really angry, really fast. Really interesting.
Hey, Abbott.
Oh, that's that. So that is where Uncle Murray comes from.
That is where Uncle Murray comes from, and I use the Uncle. I don't really explain this to kids, but I'll give you a little insight. I use the real Uncle Murray's connection with Abbott and Costello. That Abbott and Costello's inspired a couple routines in my books. So, like for instance, in Puppy's Big Day, which is really more about the dog than the cat, there's this whole running gag throughout in one of the chapters where a cop, you don't even see him. He's not on the page. Uncle Murray's trying to walk this dog, and this cop you don't even see goes, "Hey, you! You need a leash for that dog!" And he keeps giving him a ticket because Uncle Murray just keeps not having the leash or the right leash, or the dog's on the grass, that sort of thing, right? And at the end of the chapter, Uncle Murray's so outraged he lifts up his arms and his pants fall down. And that is totally an Abbott and Costello routine that I created in homage to my real life Uncle Murray.
That's fantastic. You have these connections with the entertainment industry. I mean, you were telling me your dad was psychotherapist. Is that the right title?
Psychologist, he called himself.
Psychologist.
Therapist, one of the yeah.
And some of his patients were in the movies and in TV, and they would his office was in your house, which was through four-story brownstone.
Yeah, it was a 4-story tiny brownstone that's no longer there. It was I was on 100th Street between Broadway and West End. It's just not there at all anymore.
I remember going there often. I don't remember how I got there. Maybe my folks drove me, and then eventually I took the Broadway bus. I was not a fan of the subway much when I was a kid.
Well, subways were pretty,
pretty stanky. Yeah,
they were pretty wretched places. They're still not, 5 stars, right. Even today. But compared to like the 70s, oh my God.
But I would have spent much less time in that subway than I did on the bus getting up to the Upper West Side from the Lower East Side. But a lot of fun. We were very into reading Mad Magazine, as I recall, and very into Sergio Argonés and can't remember the other artists.
Don Martin.
That was who it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spy versus Spy.
Don Martin is probably, more than any other cartoonist, my greatest influence.
That makes sense now that you say that, because his style, it's like you could have pulled Uncle Murray right out of a Don Martin cartoon.
But his style of just sort of absurd comedy. I loved what he did. I don't try to emulate him in the type of humor I create, but he was without question more influential than any other cartoonist I can think of.
Lionel, we're just reminiscing, which is just awful. Sorry about that.
I have not. The only thing I thought of is the thing that floats through my head is like George Herriman and Crazy Cat, and also Archy and Mehitabel. Which is Don Marquis.
That's right.
Do you remember Archy and Mehitabel, James?
I don't. But it also occurred to me. Yeah, another one that
it looks a lot like Crazy Cat a bit. It's Don Marquis, and what he did was, it's funny how you mentioned, you're talking, Nick, about having to like deliver a comic strip every Friday to the Haverford Bryn Mawr by College News. Don Marquis had this problem. He had to generate a comic strip or something every week, and he had horrible. He hated it, and so he invented this fictional character of this cockroach. It's Archy and Mehitabel. Archie was a cockroach and Mehitabel was a cat. This is, I think, during the 1920s. And Archie was a cockroach, and he would visit at night and use Don Marquis' typewriter. And the only way he could type stuff was by flinging his entire body onto each key, head downwards. So the things that he wrote these little poems that look like E. Cummings because there's no capitalization. And there'd be these really, really short poems, these really short story poems. And then Don Marquis would draw a picture of Archy and Mehitabel, and they're just fabulous.
George Herriman would draw the pictures.
Was it Herriman? Oh, do I have this all wrong? No,
you have it right. But George Herriman did the illustrations for the Don Marquis Archy and Mehitabel stories.
Yes, I do have it completely wrong. Okay, so that's why they look really similar, because they're done by the same person. Yeah. Because Crazy Cat looks a lot like Archy and Mehitabel, and obviously now I know why. Yeah, Don Marquis did that stuff, but Crazy Cat, because I actually, one of my good friends, Bob, is really, really plugged into this whole thing about the early comics, the early comic illustrators.
Who's your friend?
Bob Loy.
Oh, because there's a guy named Bob Bierbaum that I know of. That same first name. That's why I was curious.
Yeah, no, Bob Loy. Bob Loy would go on and on and on and on about Little Nemo and Slumberland.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he'd go on and on about Billy Corrigan, the smartest boy on earth, and he'd go on and on about all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then I really started getting fascinated by it. I was Crazy Cat is really cool, and Little Nemo and Slumberland is really cool. And Bob told me this great story about how he was traveling through. Who's the guy who wrote Little Nemo and Slumberland?
Windsor McKay.
Ah, yes.
Bob Loy found the desk that Windsor McKay used to write all the little. It was still there somewhere in Wisconsin or some state near there. And Bob actually had met the guy who did Billy Corrigan. Okay, remind me, what's his name? The guy did.
I know what you're talking about, and it escapes me. Yes.
Yeah, but people worship that guy, Billy Corrigan, the smartest boy on earth, and his stuff it's not really my cup of tea. But you can tell this guy is really obsessive about his illustration. Like it's these incredibly intricate compositions of stuff like that. And Bob knew him.
That's great.
Called him up and said, "Hey, I found McKay's desk where he did all the Little Nemo and Slumberland." He said, "Are you interested in the desk?" And I think the guy responded. He says, "I'll drive with you to Wisconsin. Let's go." So there's this whole sense of these comic illustrators really, like, it's a world. It's a world. And
well, I think Nick lives in that world now. That's in the new version of that world.
A little bit in the children's book world. I don't. I think gone are the days, the old sort of comic book days where people just sort of collected together. You know, you bear in mind, like your uncle and all these comic book artists, they didn't work at home. You know, they went into the office and and there were tables and they sat and they drew and they were throwing pages around and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of comic strip artists work that way. With the exception of when there are book festivals and such, I don't really commiserate with other children's book authors. And social media sort of makes it easy to, but also it makes it, I'm communicating in an impersonal level because I'm not actually meeting with them in person to talk to them, but I communicate with just about everybody.
Right. But there isn't like a gathering place for you and Dav Pilkey and I'm at a loss to name another. He's a funny example because he's also fairly reclusive. So I know people who know him. I met him very briefly once years ago, and that, but at a book festival. Right. Because we're just scattered, in the wind all over the country, all over the world, really. Have you come across any of the work? The girls introduced me this graphic novel series by Kazu Kibuishi. Yeah. Do you know his work? I actually saw him not too long ago. I got to chat with a little bit. He lives in San Antonio, and it was my first sort of big outing since the pandemic was to a book festival in San Antonio, where really the only two authors present were him and me. And him because he lived like very near there. He's terrific. Not only is he a extremely talented, and the series is Amulet. Yeah. His wife is also very talented. So they're this like power couple who create these wonderful books. They collaborate on a couple things, and I had. I'm trying to, you know what? Even if I can remember what it was, I don't think it was something I could tell you about. He's about to embark on a whole new project. Cool. And with a fairly well-known author, and I'm trying to remember who that was I got this information, but it's probably confidential. If it's inside, anyway. He has rabid fans, so we don't want to.
Oh my gosh!
No spoilers. So do you.
But boy, does he not. He has an extraordinarily loyal and immense fan base, and you wouldn't know it to talk to him. He's super chill, very nice guy. His process is amazing. I saw YouTube about kind of what goes into making one of the Amulet books, and it's just these like it's like a pile of paper like a foot thick of drafts and ideas, and the story writing is fantastic and really, really unique. His whole style is incredible. I'm going to look for that because I love seeing process. The process that artists and authors go through. I don't witness it myself. So when they share something like that, I embrace it. Yeah, I believe it was just on YouTube. I was just looking. I was just hoping the next book would come out, but so I stumbled across how I create Amulet. But Lionel, if you haven't seen this is really it's worth getting if you can find it.
What, Amulet?
Amulet, yeah. It's a series of 9 books. Yeah.
And is that it? Is it just the 9 and you're out?
Well,
or is it ever extending?
It's funny. There's a suggestion of a 10th book, and I don't know if there will be. But Astrid was saying, my youngest daughter was saying, that the story does reach a conclusion. So what is left for the next book? And that may actually, I know he was working on it for a while, but it may just be that the story has come to an end. It's fantastic.
I'll check it out.
Interesting. You were in San Antonio, and he's in San Antonio, and Lionel was in San Antonio, moved to Syracuse, New York, just recently. But yeah. Syracuse is gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. It's mind-blowingly really beautiful. It's a great place.
But and I don't remember which book it was that started some of this stuff. Speaking of Texas, but you write books about a cat who's misbehaving, and there's a series of characters around the cat. What is there to object to? Well, as it turns out, given the state of the country, and I don't mean to drag us into politics, and we promise we're not going to talk about politics, but is my understanding is that is your book banned in certain states? Are some of your books banned in certain states?
I've been banned. One book, Bad Kitty Christmas, was outright banned from a school in Houston. I've had several books, or Bad Kitty is a series, not outright officially banned, but removed from reading lists and removed from classroom shelves in a way that I know about, but not in paper. And I recently heard from an educator, and for her sake, I am not going to go into any detail, where I had, during the pandemic, I created these free books, Bad Kitty Wash Your Paws and Bad Kitty Gets a Shot. Which is basically about sort of, needle hesitancy, because kids are going to get shots. And even though the word COVID doesn't appear anywhere in either book, it was enough to have the free book, which is not, so it can only be downloaded, not made available at a school. So I think I might have the distinction of having created the first books to be banned that weren't even published. But
you've been convicted in absentia. Yes.
That's a good way of putting it.
We're just going to ban. Yeah, we're pre-banning everything that you publish going forward. God. Right.
The American Library Association compiles a list every decade of the most banned books from the previous 10 years. So for their list of 2010 to 2020, Bad Kitty as a series came in at number 37.
Wow.
As I like to put it, Lolita came in at 73, so take that knowledge off. But yeah, it's next time they do this list for like 2020 to 2030, I don't think I'll come anywhere near the top 100, because books are getting banned by the hundreds and literally the thousands.
Yep.
Right now. And the funny thing is that this whole idea of banning books has existed for a long time. Ever since books really began, people have been finding cause or reason to prevent them from going into certain hands. The only difference now, why I think it's more serious now than it has been in a very long time, is that this notion of banning books has become much more amplified and much more organized. You have really entire groups that exist in order to challenge books in schools. And what's interesting is that certainly in some of the cases with books that I can speak of personally, they're not even being challenged by students or parents or teachers or librarians in that school, or even in that school district, or even in that state.
Right.
But there is these, organized coalitions of people who will go out of their way to contact schools and libraries and districts and such to challenge books wherever they may be. And it's pretty serious. It's less. I mean, in my case, I have this wide series of books about the ornery pussycat. So my books are going to be available. They're going to be seen in some capacity. There are enough of them out there that kids will find them. And also my books aren't getting banned for really, overtly racist or homophobic reasons, with, possible exception of Bad Kitty Christmas.
Right.
But when it happens to a new author who's created one story, one book about a boy who wants to wear a dress,
Mhm.
and if that book is taken off the shelves in that one school, it's never going to be seen.
Right.
Any kid who may need to see that book is never going to see.
Right.
Right.
It is. They will never find it. They will never even think to ask for it or look for it.
Right. Of course, they didn't
It
know
never
existed.
existed
Yeah.
for them, and that is the ultimate goal. And in that way, these book bans are successful.
And that's why you're such a threat. Because I can see Bad Kitty 1, Bad Kitty 2, Bad Kitty. Hey, where's number 4? Shut up. Don't talk about number 4. Don't.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. I never thought of that. That's really interesting.
It's also amazing. It's not Bad Kitty Happy Holidays. It's Bad Kitty Christmas, for crying out loud. They banned Christmas. They banned. Yes.
Well, that's an excellent point, because, you know, and again, I don't want to get political either, but for instance, actually, if you want to see it for yourselves, you can just go to Amazon.com, look up Bad Kitty Christmas, and then look at all the 1-star reviews.
Wow.
And there are dozens and dozens of them. And they go back since the moment the book came out. And they will tell you the sort of, you know, they will reveal to you the fury that people have over a single word that's in that book.
Right.
Partner Pam. And I've received emails. My poor editor, her name is Emily Feinberg. She's magnificent, and she started as my former editor's assistant. And her very first week working at that publishing house, she received a phone call from an irate, reader saying, "Why is this?" And she didn't know what she'd stepped into.
Yeah.
She literally just started that job. It was like one of the first. I was like, "Oh, can you get that, Emily?" "Okay, sure." It's my first day. What?
Yeah.
So.
Nick, can I just say, I just want to put something out. Hold on to your thought.
Sure.
Whatever, godlessness bless the editors.
Yeah.
It's like a thankless job. It's not on the cover, but it's the work. And I've only had one of my books, my 2 books. I had the chance to work with an editor, and it's an amazing thing to have.
Yeah.
I just want to general love out to all the editors in the world.
Yeah, I mean, what I tell to kids is that basically editor's job is to ask themselves the same question over and over and over again. Is this the best that Nick Bruel or Jim Infantino can do?
Right.
Is this the best they can do for every word, every image, whatever it may be, every chapter, every story? Is this the best he can do? And if the answer is no or maybe, they come back to you, say, do better. Let's talk about this. Let's hash this out. And it's a really critically important step. But what I was going to say about Bad Kitty Christmas is that the book is called Bad Kitty Christmas. I have never once to this day received any word of complaint from somebody saying, "Why are you dedicating a book to Christmas? Why are I've never heard from anybody who has a different faith or has no faith. Or doesn't believe in a religion or a God or Jesus, Christmas. What it's like, why are you trying to pawn this off?
Why try to shove Christianity down my throat?
The militant atheists.
Agenda forcing Christmas down our throats.
Yeah,
the pagan cabal.
Yeah.
They were not on the phone. They were asleep at the wheel.
So here's my closing remark on my sort of diatribe about book banning. Book banning's not my biggest fear right now. I used to think, even a few weeks ago, my biggest concern was that kids were not going to be able to find certain books. My biggest fear now is that kids aren't going to be able to find any books, because Houston has now gone to the extent, and I can only see this becoming more and more, I won't say popular, but standard, where I think it's like over 20, maybe as many as 30 schools in the Houston area, which were considered low functioning, they emptied the libraries out entirely. there is no library inside these certain schools in Houston, Texas. And they've been turned into, quote, discipline centers, which sounds very Handmaid's Tale. And it's not the term that they use in the paperwork, but they do use those words. They're places where they can send students who need remedial encouragement or something along those lines. And there's a million different reasons why that is such an obviously bad idea. One of which is school library. If you're a kid in school, you are told what to study. We're going to talk about the quadratic theorem today. Okay. Right. You are told what to read. It's like, we're going to read chapter 4 of Catch and Ride. No, that's not happening.
Probably not.
Yeah. That's what we're going to do today. The library is the one place in the school where you can go and you can find the book you want.
Yep.
And they took away that choice.
Sure.
Utah has left the ABA, the American Booksellers Association.
Wow. A large faction of Texas has recently announced that they're leaving the ALA, American Library Association. The trend I can see right now, and I think it's just beginning, is to basically end libraries. They're already terribly funded. Starting, as much as 20 years ago, librarians were taken out of a lot of schools.
Right.
A lot of schools simply don't have a librarian. They might have an attendant, but they're not educators. They can't actually teach anything. They just, shelve and help kids check something out, if even. And one of the interesting things that's happening in Florida, if I can just continue here, I guess, is they've created this sort of I don't know what to call it, like a coalition of people who are supposed to be certified librarians who are going to look over each and every single book and tell you what's allowed on the shelves. Until that happens, you can't have your books on your shelves, even in the classroom. So, classroom libraries are empty. There are no books on the shelves until they are given the go-ahead from certified librarian, this committee. That's going to tell you if the book is okay. Here's the problem. There really aren't any certified librarians in Florida. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the sort of war on literature has been going on for so long that not only are certified librarians removed from their role as librarians in schools to begin with, but fewer and fewer and fewer people are going into education programs in order to learn how to become a certified librarian.
Yeah.
So this is the crisis that I think we're going to be facing. That's going to turn the corner any minute now. Libraries and librarians are under probably a greater threat than any time that I've seen. And since I started, making my own books.
Yeah. Wow. It's the fact that books are so threatening also points to why they're so important. They're powerful. And, 2 words in one of your books seemed so dangerous to people that your kid might contemplate a partner
named
a
word, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is the word that seems to get me into more trouble than anything else. Let's see if I can do it justice. Right. And that is this word. Right. The Grawlix.
Sorry.
It's not a great, I'm sorry, but
it's great, but I have to describe it.
So it's a set of symbols that cartoons say, like Andy Cap or Broomhilda, or when Donald Duck steps on a thumbtack. It's called a Grawlix.
Yeah.
And I've received so many angry emails from parents. And this is one of the reasons my books have been removed from shelves in schools and libraries and classrooms.
For Hergermurger? I mean, for Regafrega?
Yeah, for Rassafracid or whatever, because it implies the character is saying an obscenity, even though clearly I am not using an obscenity at all. But the implication that the character might be saying something that's objectionable is enough for some people to have my books removed from shelves in their entirety. And that's what got me to number 37, right?
Wow.
It's so frivolous. This is my take on it these days. The excuse people make to remove books for whatever cockamamie reason they come up with is so frivolous, but so devastating in the long run that we're experiencing the 2020s version of the 1980s satanic panic, because everything's being done in the name of protecting children.
Right.
And if you simply use that as an excuse, as hollow and baseless as it may be, it seems to be enough to get people to do your bidding.
Yeah. Well, I'll let's see. I will say something that will get the podcast banned. Let me think here. If these certified librarians are consistent, the one book they should never let into these libraries ever again is the Bible. That book is not safe for anyone. If you read the book of Job or the book of, first of all, fratricide, sodomy. There's a lot of stuff in there that's just not okay for kids, in my opinion. And I'm going to write a nasty letter to the editor.
Well, this happened in Utah. Because Utah had created such a simple, and I was going to say simplistic, method by which parents can challenge works that are brought into libraries, somebody actually did say, right, I don't think the Bible should be there.
By these standards.
There's a whole lot of genocide going on in that first, I don't want my kid reading
sacrifice.
About that. So they had to, because they'd set the parameters in their own legislation, take the Bible off and review it.
Wow.
I'm sure it's back on the shelves.
Yeah.
But they had to take those steps. Here's the funny thing. I gave a talk a few years ago, just before the pandemic. It was actually my last public appearance before the pandemic, when it was on the topic of banned books, and they who would think that they would call those would be the good old days, but they are. I closed with what's the part of the problem isn't so much that these people don't trust the books, they don't trust the librarians. And librarians are trained, they know what they're doing. And the question I closed with was, because I was speaking to educators, I'll be the first to say that clearly every librarian knows that not every book belongs in their collection. They know. But there are certain books that should be banned. There are certain books, and the measurement I use is if that book can actually result in physical harm. And there's a few, but they exist. The examples I use is the Protocols of Zion.
Yep.
Mein Kampf might still be in print today. I know Houghton Mifflin had a paperback edition that was on the shelves. I would argue it probably shouldn't be there. The Anarchist Cookbook. I have a copy.
I was just going to say, like how to make a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
I actually wouldn't go so far as to say either of those two should be banned. I think people should know what they are and be able to read them. That our ignorance of, the history of anti-Semitism should be taught and should be read. But yeah, there's a problem with teaching everybody how to make bombs, I suppose. Yeah. Although there's the internet too. So
Yeah.
Hard to say.
All of these things exist. And you're right. I think we should have a knowledge that they exist and where they came from and why they're harmful and why they're dangerous. No question about that. But, I do think that librarians who are well trained and know their collection and the people that they cater to better than anybody else need to be the ones that make that decision. And if you don't, and every library already has within its system a method by which you can step to them and protest that their decisions.
Right.
They're public servants. They were getting it up to their armpits every day already.
Yeah.
Before these weird times came about. But let them talk about it. Let them explore what's right for their collections.
Yeah. Lionel, do you have any thoughts on book banning?
Oh, I have all kinds of thoughts. I don't think they're particularly relevant. I think it's important to remember that I'm always a little worried about all the discussions I hear on the media, because they talk about books being banned. Many times what's actually being discussed is whether a book can go in a particular section of the library. Sometimes it is about just getting the book out of the library altogether. Other times it's about, does this really need to be in the preteen section, or does this need to be in the little kids section, stuff like that. All that I worry about that sometimes. But yeah, there's a lot of nonsense going on. And a lot of people get bent out of shape. I find it fascinating that people have time to go down to the library and argue about stuff when, there's this immense sewer called the internet, which is available at everybody's fingertips right here, right now. To me, it feels like people blowing out a candle in a burning building. But I think I think Nick put it very well, which is that library's freedom.
Yeah.
The library's freedom. It's the one place where they can't tell you what to do. Okay, you get a half an hour, you can do whatever you want. Okay. And you can go and you can pull anything off the shelf and you can read it. That is a revolution. That is literally a revolutionary concept.
Yeah.
That we're not guiding you and you can do whatever you want. This is the thing that has been an explosive idea since 1420.
Yeah, and
whenever it was.
What could be more American? I mean, the idea of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of what you read.
Mm-hmm.
Attacking that anyway. We have stepped into politics. And we're
not stepping into politics. We're really not stepping into politics. We're stepping into a fascinating thing, which is that the invention of the printing press really marked a complete fracture in history, because up to that time, it took decades. It took a century, if not centuries, for technological changes to disperse across Europe and from China. Like people talk about, the compass came from China. Yeah, it took like 300 years, okay? Because somebody dropped it off the back of a camel, and then somebody picked it up and they took it to Turkey, and somebody, the printing press, from the moment it was invented, within 25 years, there were printing presses in every single European capital. And the number of nothing had ever happened, and nothing was going to happen again until Napster.
Mm-hmm.
Really, Napster was the most rapidly downloaded and adopted piece of software in the history of mankind. It happened. It was on an order of magnitude, and that was another revolution we're still living through. We're living in. If you point your microwave telescope at the sky and listen carefully enough, you can hear Sean Fanning giggling in the air, because Napster changed the universe. But Gutenberg did, and it blew society to pieces. I mean, the Reformation and the challenge to the Catholic Church is directly, you could draw a straight line. Yeah, books are really, as Hopper says to the princess in A Bug's Life. Be careful, princess. Ideas are very dangerous things. And they are. Books are really, really dangerous things. And that's why people get bent out of shape about them, because they're freedom. Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
It's all over the place. I think. Congratulations. That's what I say to you, Nick. I mean, the fact that people feel this threatened about, a book that's about a cat that needs to take a bath. Wow. Wow, that's powerful.
What you said about the printing press is absolutely true. What I'd add to it is that what it did was it made books accessible. And because books simply were not accessible,
right,
except for the extraordinarily wealthy who could afford to go, to wait to order a book and wait months and months for it to be, to be created or printed or handwritten and drawn and such. Now that books were accessible, people had a reason to learn how to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And once they knew how to read, they were able to assimilate information that they might not have been able to assimilate before.
Mm-hmm.
So, books became powerful, and
it broke the monopoly. At that point, the internet was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was the primary information network.
Well, Catholic Church was the main. Was the publisher.
Literacy.
Yeah.
It was everything, and they were the internet. And they were Google and IBM all tied up together. And what Gutenberg did is it broke that monopoly and exploded books all over the place. And then Aldous Manutius comes along in Venice and invents the paperback. And everybody, it's a great story. It's a fabulous story about people people wrote a lot of really wacky books. And immediately governments start doing things like you have to get a charter to run a printing press. You have to be licensed to run a printing press, and there's all that stuff. But it moved fast enough, and then you have and then at the same time you have the emergence. So you have this emergence of this separate sort of power structure, which is sort of the universities and the printing presses. But the universities, and Jim and I have talked before about, one of the things I find fascinating about Western European history is this multipolar power structure where you have the church. But you have these secular governments, which are really separate and distinct from the church. But in addition to that, you have this thing called the universities, and they're a separate power structure, and they become their own thing. So you have this dialogue, and they're constantly trying to shut each other down, which is what power structures do. And I think banning the books, and also just like you said with the Euston School District, but also I work in higher education, and there's all kinds of stuff going on in higher education. Which is, everybody was told to get rid of their diversity, equity, and inclusion departments. Universities are being told that they're not going to receive as much funding for liberal arts. You need to start. You just have to pretty much teach all STEM and engineering stuff. I mean, there's always this friction between the secular government and between the religious authority and the church. Anyway, I'm rambling on and on.
Well, when I asked you about your thoughts on book banning, I was kind of hoping for like a couple of sentences.
Okay.
Just, I'm glad you have so many thoughts. I am a little bit. I don't want to keep Nick too long. It's getting late. Where you are, I'm sure you've got family things to attend to. Is this a good point to wrap it up? What are you working on right now? What's the next book? And I also want to say, who is Melvin Bubble? Will there be another Melvin Bubble?
No, there isn't. That book just went out of print not too long ago, within the last 2 years, I'm afraid. But that is my favorite read aloud. Well, see, at the end of this year will come Bad Kitty Makes a Movie.
Oh, cool.
And the one I'm working on now is going to be Bad Kitty Party Animal. And the original title I had for it was Bad Kitty Dog Party. It's going to be the dog has a birthday party, and Kitty just hates the idea of it, but she has this responsibility to try and get him a present, that sort of thing. It's turned into the longest Bad Kitty book. It's going to be 192 pages once it's completed.
192 pages?
Holy moly!
Yeah. Well, the last two have been 176. This one's going to be 192. Yeah.
Have you got any pushback from your readers? I mean, have you had like angry little kids like saying,
Hey, it's too long.
No, if anything, my goal from the very beginning with these early chapter books was to create something that it had to be. I mean, it had to be like over 100 pages. I think the shortest one is like 140 plus pages. And the reason I do that is because I want kids to be able to, even though they're not very text heavy, I want kids to be able to finish reading this book and say, "Whoa, I read this thing. It's over 100 pages."
Yeah, that's good.
But so far, nobody's pushed back on the length of them. I other than myself, because 192 pages is just it's just daunting and a lot of work. But I'll meet my deadline. And it should work out.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think about how much work each one of these is, and now they're graphic novels, so they're probably more work.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. They're more work in terms of writing, but I'm very lucky in that I don't put in the color. I don't really know how to do that digitally. I could learn, but it would be time consuming. So my publisher is very kind in that they invest in hiring colorists, and I more or less supervise them, but they all have a far better sense of color theory than I do. So they do a pretty good job, and my supervision is minimal at best in the long run. So that means I only have to do the line art. Whereas in the last, like the books that Lionel has, I was hand painting sort of monochromatic watercolor washes. I was hand painting all of those pages. So it would be an additional level of illustration work that would take me another 2 months after I did the line art. But now I don't have to do that anymore.
Are you doing these with pencil and pen and paper and ink?
Still
on a page?
Yeah, on paper. Yeah.
This is great.
This is what I finished inking today.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm sorry, listeners, you can't see it, but he's got he's got the professional, heavy grade artist paper that my uncle always used to work on.
Yeah,
that's awesome stuff.
And it would make sense for me to learn how to use what's that program in Apple?
Well, there's a Cintiq, which is you could talk to my brother. He has a particular. It's not an iPad. He has a dedicated machine that really does this professionally. Maybe it's worth a try.
It's definitely worth a try for me if I ever start exploring other avenues outside of Bad Kitty, which I hope to. But for now, I have a good system going.
Yeah.
I can create one of these books in roughly 6 months' time. So
I was going to say, your production is so low. You've got to ramp it up. My God, I'm being sarcastic. I can't imagine. It's amazing. It's astounding how many books you've got out.
Thank you.
And they're all a joy to read, and it doesn't matter if you've got kids or not. Take a look at a Bad Kitty book.
Thank you, Jim.
And I want to say thank you. Thank you for talking with us.
It was fun.
Funny Not Funny podcast is produced by me, Jim Infantino. This clip from the album Utopia Revisited. We are found wherever podcasts are found. Visit our website at funnynotfunny.bigego.com. Please tell your friends and leave a rating or review.